So my title, Will You Teach Me From Seriousness to Sincerity with Apprentice Phenomenography? I hope that will make sense by the end of my talk. So this is the philosopher Alan Watts, a self-styled spiritual entertainer who rose to prominence among the beatniks of the 1960s. He once raised the distinction between seriousness and sincerity in a discussion on love. If an attractive person says to me, "I love you," I might ask them, "Are you serious or are you just toying with me?" What's advised against such a question, because the hope is really that they aren't serious and that they will play with him. What I should ask them is, "Are you sincere?" For in seriousness, says Watts, there is a kind of gravity. If something is serious, it is heavy, it sinks. A serious person is closed in upon themselves, weighed down by their own self-clenching. In sincerity, however, there is a brevity. The angels fly because they take themselves lightly, says Watts. In seriousness, we are decidedly set to action. Our minds are deliberately made up, and with gritted teeth and rigid posture, we act with intentional force. With such orientations toward a lover, we strangle them with our determination. In sincerity, by contrast, we are nonetheless committed to a particular scene. However, we remain spontaneous, open, flexible, playful, and vulnerable. In this paper, I ask what it would mean to shift our methodological positionality from seriousness to sincerity. What form would a method born from sincerity as opposed to seriousness take? I begin by articulating what this first orientation of seriousness looks like in the anthropological project, before moving on to an outline of what I am calling apprentice phenomenography. In short, this method messes with ethnographic orthodoxies by positioning the anthropologist not as a researcher of a given group of people trying to conceptualize their conceptualizations, but rather as a student of a group of people seeking to inscribe in writing that which appears to consciousness in concrete situations of blatting. Why am I conceiving of this approach in terms of sincerity as distinct from seriousness? There are injunctions from ontological scholars to take the visions of world rather than worldviews of our fieldwork companions seriously. Most notably, Eduardo Viveros de Castro defines anthropology as a Western intellectual endeavor that takes seriously that which intellectuals cannot take seriously. That which intellectuals cannot take seriously are typically the claims of indigenous peoples whose cosmologies are couched in anthropological terms as animism, defined as the imputation of personhood and soulment or liveliness to entities typically not regarded by Western intellectuals as bearing such exclusively human capacities. As Rainer Willisliff notes, this injunction launches not from an attempt at exoticization, not from framing non-Western others as possessing more wisdom than Western intellectuals, and nor is it about respect for other cultures. Rather, it is about having our thinking transformed. To do this, according to Viveros de Castro, we take seriously what we typically cannot, as much as we deliberately don't take seriously what we typically do. Another prominent ontological anthropologist, Morten Axel Pedersen, refers to this orientation as the ontological epoche, or bracketing. For Pedersen, ontological anthropology is a critical examination of the conditions of possibility for anthropological knowledge. As he states in more detail, our ultimate ambition is to take the things that people in the field say, do, or use so seriously that they trump all metaphysical claims made by any political, religious, or academic authority, including the authority that we assume in making this very claim. Conceptually derived from Husserlian phenomenology, the ontological epoche not only brackets out the cultural attitudes of ethnographers, it also brackets out anthropology's own natural understandings. In this seriousness depicted here, we leave our taken-for-granted assumptions, seemingly our entire habitus, to the wayside. One wonders what is left after all this bracketing. What can remain of the anthropologist after being purified of all their dirtiness, which risks polluting the pristine alterity of the ontologies of our field companions. In taking our filthy shoes off at the door before entering the house of the other, we assume that what we take for granted cannot change, and so we don't bring it in with us. If indeed ontological anthropology's united aim, as Michael W. Scott defines the project, is to no longer leave the cosmos and the fact of its teeming with other than human entities, creatures, commodities, concepts, and characters alike outside of the analysis, then I argue we must bracket nothing out, not even our own assumptions. The fruit of sincerity, in contrast to seriousness, is its affordance for the anthropologist in reaching new situations of taken for grantedness. This is not about hypothetical worlds, but an openness to our own situatedness, our own sense of world being altered. The serious anthropologist, by contrast, is safe from susceptibility to alteration in the way they confront alterity conceptually, but not actually, keeping their true commitments to the world hidden, in reserve, bracketed out and away from vulnerability to change. To contrast this situation of seriousness more acutely, let me expand the notion of sincerity. For Emmanuel Levinas, sincerity is naive openness to the sensual world. Other synonyms might be enjoyment, absorption, theatricality, sensuality. For Levinas, however, sincerity only pertains to the broadest phenomena which populate our conscious vistas, our relation to anonymous elements, the wind, the sea, the deep earth. Graham Harman, founder of the movement in philosophy known as object-oriented ontology, or OOO, pushes Levinasian sincerity further. He acknowledges Levinas's assertion that we never rise above the murmuring sensuality of the world in which we bathe. But what Levinas fails to recognize is that our relations to specific things is equally sincere. In a humorous example, Harman writes, "To purchase or barter melons, to use them as targets for archery, to poison them and offer them to the enemy, are actions every bit as sincere as any aimless basking in the shapeless qualities of the earth." What makes these actions sincere, in the sense I am trying to articulate in contrast to seriousness, is that my energies, passions, intentions, my life is expended in dealing with entities. As Harman puts it finally, I am listening closely to their strengths, limitations, and possibilities as I come to terms with their reality. What would a method look like in which the anthropologist dispenses their life energies sincerely engaged with the entities of their field companion's life world, submitting to their teaching? I propose that this is quite different to the task of taking our interlocutor's most obscure, radically other statements seriously by trying to generate concepts which are up to the task of building a hypothetical world which would support those statements. In sincerity, we are touched by entities. We are embroiled in their reality. Now that the distinction between seriousness and sincerity is clearer, let me move to the method. For the past 2.5 years, I have been apprenticing under a team of 6 stonemasons who are tasked with the care and repair of thousands of stone monuments which populate Sydney's Rookwood necropolis. Unlike most church graveyards, Rookwood necropolis, or City of the Dead, is comprised of numerous different cemeteries, predominantly distinguished along religious, cultural, or denominational lines. One can imagine that what a stone monument is, or perhaps how it appears, depends upon the person relating to it and the purposes with which they approach it. For the recently bereaved, a monument is often a tangible deposition or continuation of the materiality of the deceased. Their warm flesh is exchanged for stone, their name and image inscribed into its facade, and those that survive the dead now have a substitute to touch, witness their tears, to kiss with yearning lips, and to offer flowers, fruit, incense, and presents. Who else visits cemeteries? For genealogists, cemeteries are not nearly as sentimental. They are merely repositories of social histories. We ought to conserve cemeteries not because they house the substitutes for the dead, but because they are archives, storage facilities wrought in stone. For teenagers, alternatively, they are wide open spaces with few to no prying eyes, quiet, creepy, forbidden, especially at night. Their atmosphere mixes with hormones to make a concoction spurring the most harlequin antics. As an apprentice stonemason, I've witnessed my team members stumble across the residues of their youthful excesses, vandalized monuments and smashed stained glass windows, as well as firecrackers, Gatorade bottle bongs, and distressed prophylactics. The work of the monumental stonemason in a cemetery stands in relation to each of these groups and more. Re-erecting fallen and fractured, vandalized steles, cleaning and recutting or rendering visible inscriptions bearing important social history details, and restoring the monument of a great-great-grandmother such that her descendants can stand before and witness the last remaining material trace of her existence. These are all tasks I've been learning from my teachers over the past 3 years. Suppose one were interested in trying to understand what a monument is for a stonemason, however. The work is hard. Stone abrades the skin. Its dust binds to ducts in the lungs, resulting in inflammation and scarring. The mortars used to cushion between two pieces of stone are hydrophilic and suck moisture from one's hands. The tools used to alter stone are heavy and often loud. Stonemasons are prone to tinnitus, white finger syndrome, and spinal disc injuries. Why on earth would one continue in such a career? I put this question to my senior tradesman Matthew early on in my apprenticeship. I don't know, he said. Stone just gets under your skin. You learn to love it, you'll see. From there I could have proceeded with my fieldwork, taking Matthew's reflections on stone very seriously. How do we need to conceptualize love in order to grapple with Matthew's claim about loving stone? What kind of a world must Matthew live in such that stone can be loved? What concepts are required to explicate an ontology by which learning leads to loving? Instead, I assumed that it was possible for me to also learn to love stone. So I continued with my apprenticeship for 2.5 years and eventually wrote what I called an apprentice phenomenography. In this text, my doctoral thesis, I described the process as becoming intimate with stone monuments under the guidance of my 6 mentors. Lithic intimacy is the answer to my original question. Architects and heritage consultants don't develop the same kind of love of stone that masons do. Stonemasons are vulnerable to it. Its dust gets in their eyes and lungs, its grains under their nails, in their hair, it abrades their skin, its solar-absorbed heat singes their fingertips, their muscles tense and embrace its weight, their ears prick to its gallery of sounds, their tools, in turn, mark it and alter it forever. Stone and stonemasons enjoy one another in sincerity. The sociologist Richard Sennett in 2008 published a landmark text entitled The Craftsman. In it, he upholds the figure of the craftsperson as representative of the human desire to do things well. For Sennett, anyone, as in a scientist, a homemaker, a priest, a hunter, a mathematician, anyone who seeks to undertake a task well, to see it through, to be patient and diligent, is a craftsperson. In a similar move, I want to stretch the notion of the apprentice. By apprentice, I mean something more capacious than the role I have performed for the last 3 years. My apprenticeship has been formal in that I literally signed forms. But similar to Sennett's craftsperson, my notion of apprentice means something more. An apprentice is a committed learner who recognizes their own position as the unknower. An apprentice understands that to move out from their position as unknower, they must pay attention to the teaching of someone they recognize as being knowledgeable. The apprentice is willing to submit to the authority of the knower. An apprentice doesn't ask questions of their teacher with the intention of figuring out how to conceptualize the teaching to make another purpose of it. An apprentice is introduced to the object of learning such that the apprentice becomes intimate with it in their own right, but always with recognition of and deference to those who taught them. One does not need to undertake formal apprenticeship to be an apprentice in this sense. One only needs to ask someone who they recognize as being knowledgeable the question, "Will you teach me?" and to commit to this teaching with full sensual sincerity. I want to close finally by outlining what I mean by phenomenography. Despite the ring of novelty to the term, it actually encapsulates something I believe anthropologists are doing all the time under the rubric of ethnography, but which I also believe deserves its own term. For existential anthropologist Albert Piette, ethnography too quickly moves from the level of individual action and utterances to the level of group dynamics. Phenomenography is his alternative. For Piette, phenomenography involves unflinching descriptions of modes of consciousness of a single individual across a string of situations. I believe that this focus on a single individual is unnecessarily limiting, and Piette conveniently and problematically ignores the inherent intersubjectivity of fieldwork. I advocate a looser conception of phenomenography only based on its etymology. Simply, phenomenography is the inscription of that which appears in situations. Anthropological fieldwork is made up of collages of situations. We cannot help but live in and be accountable to them. And they are invariably intersubjective and made up of an array of more than human actors. By inscribing that which appears to us in these concrete lived situations, we remain in sincere contact with the entities of our interlocutors' affairs. We ourselves stand to be affected by them. Now here I'll illustrate with just two examples. I had a bunch, but it's not enough time. So from within our own midst, surprise. In her multi-species ethnographic monograph on Marin people in West Papua, Sophie Chow writes of being enskilled by one of her Marin companions in the arduous labour of sago grasping. In the sago grove, Chow gives close phenomenographic attention to what appears to her senses, being there herself, letting the entities of her surrounds envelop her in a shared sensual ether. Her Marin teachers show her this world, implore her to listen and respond to its directives, introducing her to their most intimate sensual companions. Phenomenographic detail can't be paraphrased, so I quote as much as time allows here. Oh, just a little bit. Well, I don't know how much time I've got. So anyway, they teach her how to notice and distinguish the diverse voices of the forest, the crackling of bamboo shoots in the midday heat, the deafening mating calls of cicadas, the susurration of rippling rivers, and the clumsy flopping of fish in nearby streams. Chow submits herself to the teaching of her Marin companions and inscribes for the reader what it is like to be introduced to this teeming world of more than human entities by whom Chow herself stands to be affected. And finally, medieval art historian Bisera Pencheva employs a phenomenographic method, though she does not term her approach in this way. If we are to grapple with the lived sensual encounters between worshippers and icons in ritual spaces of Byzantium, Pencheva says we cannot examine them in the clinical glass cages in which they are stored in isolation under even electric light, for here they remain inanimate and expressionless. To demonstrate her meaning, she stages her own encounters with the relief icons, which are comprised of metal, gold, and enamel, and encrusted with gems and jewels. The space in which she stages these encounters is cavernous and dark. A small window set high above lets in sun rays from the left. She lights a candle and moves it around the image of the Archangel Michael. Once the candle is lit, the surfaces transform. The golden filigree rinsau becomes incandescent, as if breathing in its trembling and pulsating phatismos. If the candle continues to rise, the shadows in the lower half of the eyeball increase, creating the impression that the angel is bringing his gaze downward. Though Pencheva's objects are stripped of the original social context in which they were fabricated, nonetheless they retain an autonomy irreducible to that context. The exercise is worthwhile because she attends to the object as a distinct contoured form which has persisted through the centuries. By submitting herself to its effects, she is affected by the presence of the same real object that her historical interlocutors were affected by, in conjunction with their instruction for correct ritual comportment. In the simplest terms I can muster, the distinction between seriousness and sincerity is this. The serious anthropologist is not interested in being in relation themselves to real things. They are interested in eliciting from the other, characterized by their radical alterity, descriptions of their world, which is presumed not to be shared between them. The sincere anthropologist, on the other hand, is interested in the real world and assumes they will learn about it from their fieldwork companions by submitting to their teaching. They assume that what they have to teach stands in relation to real entities, animals, plants, stone monuments, ritual artifacts, ancestors, divine beings. To ask someone, "Will you teach me?" is to assume that their understanding and knowledge of the world pertains to real things. It indicates that one is sincere, that one believes that what one will be taught is useful, insightful, and real. And there's a photo of me sincerely in a hole.